Before we enter today's dark and chilling story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more mysteries like this. And one question, where in the world are you watching from at this moment? Let's start our video. In a sealed drawer inside the abandoned courthouse of Monroe County sits a document so fragile no archivist wants to touch it. A search report dated August 4th, 1843. 5 riders sent into the pine swamp. 5 rifles. 5 trained men. Only their horses returned, snorting, trembling, saddles ripped as if torn by enormous hands. The sheriff wrote a single line beneath the report. No bodies. No tracks. No shadows. The ink is smeared as though written in panic. These disappearances were never printed in any newspaper, never recorded in any county ledger. But plantation owners whispered about it behind locked doors. Slaves prayed against it in their cabins at night. And young children, unable to sleep, swore they felt someone walking outside their windows, barefoot on dry leaves that made no sound at all. This was the first cluster of deaths attributed, silently, fearfully, to a figure the state of Alabama still denies ever existed. A man with no past, no papers, no parents. A man who did not bleed when whipped, did not cast a shadow at noon, and did not die when shot. Over the next 23 years, 200 white men would disappear or die in ways that science, religion, and law found impossible to explain. No remains were ever found. No killer was ever captured. No explanation was ever admitted. But the oral testimonies of the enslaved told a different story, one the government buried. A story of a figure they called only. The one who walks without light. No plantation ledger lists his name. No slave manifest records his arrival. No bill of sale exists for him anywhere in the American South. Yet his presence appears in hundreds of whispered accounts, scattered across counties, states, and decades. According to elders interviewed long after emancipation, he appeared suddenly during the hurricane of 1821, standing in the torn fields while a lightning bolt illuminated him from behind. Workers said he did not flinch. They thought he was one of them until they realized something was wrong. He carried no chains. He spoke no language they recognized. His gaze was described as older than the first hunger. The overseers captured him, of course. They shackled him and dragged him to the quarters. But every metal piece placed upon him cracked open by sunrise, not bent, not rusted, but split as though the iron itself rejected him. Some said he breathed differently, so quietly his chest did not move. Others claimed that when he passed by, torches dimmed. By 1830, slave communities across Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas were whispering the same thing. He was not born. He was sent. Plantation owners dismissed these stories until their first overseers began dying. One fell from a barn. Another drowned in a shallow trough. A third vanished from his own porch. Only the enslaved understood the pattern. They had seen the stranger watching, and they knew he had begun choosing who deserved to disappear. During the 1930s Federal Writers Project, 3 elderly freedmen, men who lived counties apart and never knew one another, shared nearly identical stories about the same figure. Their interviews were swiftly classified and removed, but carbon copies survived in private hands. One interviewee, age 94, insisted he saw the man walk through a field so quietly the birds did not fly away. He moved, the man said, like he belonged to the land before the land belonged to God. Another freedman claimed the man had no shadow. At first, interviewers dismissed this as poetic metaphor, until they realized the man repeated it in every retelling, never altering a detail. A third provided the most disturbing statement. He weren't a slave, weren't a man either. He was something that hated chains so much the chains broke themselves. All 3 testified that plantation owners knew of him but refused to speak openly. They feared not the mysterious man, but the consequences of acknowledging him. His existence would imply that the land itself might rise against them, that nature had chosen sides, and that their violence had summoned something older, darker, and infinitely more patient than human justice. The testimonies were blacked out in the official WPA archive, labeled delusional, superstitious, unstable. But we know government censors do not silence fantasies, only truths. The first documented cluster of disappearances occurred at the Harrifield Plantation, a sprawling cotton empire owned by the Withers family. The plantation kept meticulous records: births, deaths, punishments, crop yields. Yet in the summer of 1832, the ledger contains 7 consecutive blank pages. 7 pages torn free by trembling hands. Descendants later revealed the truth. Those pages had once listed the names of 7 overseers, each found dead on separate nights. One strangled by a rope that had been locked inside a shed. Another found atop a barn he never climbed. A third discovered half buried in soil as though the earth itself had swallowed him. The Withers family fled the house before dawn, leaving everything behind except the slaves chained inside the quarters. But by sunset, the enslaved reported the chains were broken. Every single lock split. Every hinge shattered. The stranger walked out of the fields that night and stood at the gate, watching the fleeing carriages disappear down the road. Some said he smiled. Some said his face did not move at all. Some claimed the horses refused to pass him. Years later, farmers reported that nothing grew on that land again, not even weeds. The soil turned a permanent ashen gray, as if stained by an event too heavy for the earth to forget. But the deaths did not stop with Hereford. They spread. Alarmed by the rising number of disappearances, county officials assembled a group of 12 armed riders in 1834. These were seasoned slave catchers, men who tracked fugitives through darkness, swamps, and storms. They believed no slave could outsmart them. They were right. But the thing they hunted was not a slave. The group entered the pine woods before dawn. Witnesses heard only one gunshot, followed by an echo that did not match any weapon they carried. By nightfall, none returned. The next morning, their horses were found along the riverbank, shaking, soaked, and blood-smeared, but uninjured. Every saddle had been ripped open, every bridle torn apart, every rifle missing. A journal found near the water contained one final scribbled line, written diagonally across a torn page. He was already behind us. The state blamed the swamp. The churches blamed sin. The townspeople blamed runaway slaves. But deep in the quarters, old men whispered the unspeakable truth. The riders had not found the no-shadow man. He had allowed them to see him, and that was a privilege he rarely granted twice. Pastors in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi recorded a strange pattern in their private diaries. Entire congregations reporting nightmares on the same night. Dreams of a man standing at the foot of their beds, barefoot, silent, staring. No shadow stretching behind him. The churches wanted to condemn these visions as demonic possession, until one minister confessed he, too, had seen the figure watching him outside his window. Another pastor found Bible pages torn only from verses about chains and justice. A third woke to find muddy footprints on the church floor leading directly to the pulpit, then vanishing midway through the aisle. None dared preach about these signs. No sermon ever mentioned the no-shadow man. No prayer rebuked him. No ritual attempted to banish him. Because to acknowledge him was to admit the hierarchy of their world could be broken by a presence they could neither name nor control. The church buried its fear in silence. The state buried its fear in paperwork. But the enslaved knew the truth. The figure did not hunt at random. He hunted those who enforced chains. In 1841, an orphaned white girl named Eliza Rollins was taken in by a wealthy widow on the outskirts of Mobile. Eliza rarely spoke, but the widow kept her for cheap labor. At age 10, the girl began waking in the night screaming about a tall man standing in the yard. For weeks the widow ignored her, until one dawn when she went outside to gather laundry and found something carved into the wagon wood. The child sees truth. Authorities accused the enslaved carpenters. They denied it. Then they pointed to a detail no one had mentioned. The message was carved impossibly deep, beyond what human hands could do without splintering the board. The widow burned the wagon, but the nightmares continued. Eliza claimed the man had no shadow. She claimed he walked differently, as though the land belonged to him. She claimed he told her something without speaking. 3 weeks later, the widow disappeared. No signs of struggle. No body. Only a trail of disturbed leaves leading into the dense woods, and Eliza standing at the tree line, saying softly, "He came for what was owed." Officials questioned her for days. She spoke calmly, without fear. Then she said something that made every deputy step back. He wasn't here for her. He was here for all of you. She was sent away. The case was closed. But the killings accelerated. During the industrial expansion of the 1840s, slave labor was leased to copper mines across the South. These mines were brutal, suffocating places where men worked by dim lantern light. In 1844, workers reported seeing a figure deep in the tunnels, tall, barefoot, unmoving. Miners believed it was a hallucination until lanterns began to extinguish one by one. Search crews descended into the shafts. They returned with terrified stories of hearing footsteps behind them, even when no one else was underground. Then the bodies began appearing. 6 supervisors were found dead within a week. 1 crushed beneath a collapsed beam no one remembered being loose. 1 pinned between carts that required 3 men to move. 1 drowned face down in a puddle too shallow to swallow a man's mouth. The slaves leased to the mine deserted en masse. Not one was punished. Not one was pursued. The mining company blamed sabotage. The state blamed runaways. But the miners themselves whispered about the no-shadow man. A few swore they saw him dissolve into the darkness like ink sinking into paper. Soon after, the mine closed permanently. Reports say the tunnels still echo with soft, pacing footsteps. Sheriff Amos Kester was the first white official to openly acknowledge the pattern. In 1847, he compiled a confidential document listing 119 unexplained deaths across 4 counties. He titled it simply, "The Pattern." He noticed certain consistencies. No shadows near the scene. No surviving weapons. No animal disturbances. No bodies. No witnesses. And always one detail: iron objects found split open. He presented his findings to state officials. 2 weeks later, he disappeared. His badge was found placed carefully atop his desk. His boots were discovered standing upright outside the jailhouse door, as if he had stepped out of them and continued walking barefoot. Kester's report vanished from state records, but a fragment survived in his journal. "If he is not flesh, we are in a war we cannot win." The state replaced him with a man who refused to mention the matter again. The killings continued, but any mention of the no-shadow man was now treated as hallucination or sedition. The land had begun swallowing its evidence. When the Civil War erupted, many believed the killings would stop. Chaos has a way of masking disappearances, after all. But the war only intensified the phenomena. Confederate officers reported entire night patrols vanishing. Camp sentries returned raving about a man standing in the tree line, unmoving, watching. Colonels logged mysterious deaths, but filed them under enemy action. Yet the patterns were identical to the pre-war cases. Union soldiers later testified they never encountered this figure. Only Confederate troops did. Some saw this as divine justice. Others saw it as a reckoning older than any nation. One soldier wrote in his diary, "We fight the Union by day, but something else kills us at night." Another, "He is not slave nor soldier. He is something the land remembers, and we do not." The Civil War explained away the disappearances, but it did not cause them. The no-shadow man had simply been given more people to judge. In 1856, a group of New England scholars secretly traveled south after hearing rumors of a supernatural fugitive. They expected folklore. What they found terrified them. They collected testimonies from dozens of freedmen, runaways, and sympathetic whites. They sketched maps of disappearance sites. They documented the iron that split open and weapons that vanished. The scholars concluded the killings were not random acts of rebellion, but targeted judgments. Every victim had committed acts of exceptional cruelty: torture, rape, mutilation, murder. Their notes describe him as a selective force, not a vengeful ghost, not a demon, not a man, something else. The scholars' report was burned in a suspicious fire at Harvard in 1863, but a surviving page states, "He does not kill the innocent. He kills those the law protects." The scholars warned the U.S. government that the South was harboring something ancient. Washington ignored them. "You cannot investigate what you are too afraid to name." By 1865, the death count had reached approximately 200 men, though some oral accounts claim the number was much higher. Plantation owners refused to speak publicly. Newspapers buried reports. Government agents suppressed records. But the enslaved kept meticulous oral lists. Not one innocent person appears on their list. Every name is a man known for violence. This is the part historians refuse to accept. The figure did not kill randomly. He did not kill for rebellion. He did not kill for race. He killed for something deeper. A cosmic correction. A balancing. A restoration of violated order. When emancipation came, the deaths suddenly stopped. Not slowly. Immediately. The no-shadow man disappeared as abruptly as he arrived. The land went silent. The fear remained. Decades after emancipation, a vast field in Monroe County remained untouched by farmers. Nothing grew there. Not grass, not weeds, not roots. Locals called it the Silent Acre. Children who wandered too close felt nauseous. Adults heard faint breathing when the wind was still. Dogs refused to enter. Freedmen who had once lived on the nearby plantation claimed that this field was the place where the no-shadow man had first been seen walking barefoot through the storm. Some said he had been waiting there. Some said he had been buried there. Some whispered he had been born from the soil itself. The county eventually fenced it off. By the 1930s, it was quietly zoned as unsuitable for development. Today, the field is still empty, still silent, still avoided. As if the land remembers something the people refused to say aloud. That by the early 1900s, the South had tried to bury the tale entirely. But memory is stubborn, and some families carry stories in their bones. Black families whispered his name in cautionary tales, not of fear, but reverence. White families whispered his name in terror, afraid he might return. Some elderly survivors described visits in dreams, silent warnings about people they should avoid. Others claimed the man appeared at their doorframes during moments of great danger, only to vanish before dawn. A few descendants insisted that the figure never truly left, that he simply became quiet, patient, resting, waiting. But waiting for what? No one agreed. Some said injustice itself would summon him again. Others believed new chains, of any kind, would call him back. A few feared the land was merely catching its breath. And one elderly woman, interviewed in 1938, whispered, "He didn't vanish. He is only hiding in the places we stopped looking." In 1919, a young historian named James O'Connell began researching missing county ledgers. His colleagues mocked him for pursuing ghost stories, until he discovered a hidden box in a courthouse attic containing torn plantation records and dozens of missing person reports. He realized something shocking. All official records had been edited after the fact. Death certificates altered. Disappearance dates changed. Names removed. Entire cases labeled as accidents, even when no bodies existed. The more O'Connell uncovered, the more fearful local officials became. They urged him to abandon the research. They warned him not to publish. He ignored them. On the night before he planned to submit his manuscript, O'Connell vanished. His apartment was untouched. His notes were gone, and his typewriter ribbon had been stripped clean of ink, something that made no rational sense. A neighbor later confessed she saw someone in O'Connell's hallway that night. A tall figure, barefoot, casting no shadow. She assumed it was a trick of the moonlight. Authorities did not investigate. The manuscript was never found. In 1952, a federal survey uncovered a sealed storage vault beneath the mobile courthouse. Inside were dozens of suppressed documents, diaries, sheriff logs, incomplete ledgers, and censored letters referencing disappearances attributed to a shadowless man. These documents were deemed historically insignificant and quietly destroyed. But the archivist on duty noticed something disturbing. Every metal box containing records related to the figure was split open, cleanly, symmetrically, as though the metal had once been liquid. Government officials dismissed it as corrosion. The archivist resigned the next day. He later mailed a letter to a private researcher, claiming, "I do not believe the stories, but I believe something did not want those records kept." He did not elaborate. He never worked in archives again. From the 1960s onward, a trickle of reports emerged from hunters, hikers, and night shift workers across the Deep South. None of these individuals knew the legend, yet they all described the same experience. A tall man standing in the woods, barefoot, unmoving, staring. Approaching him caused an overwhelming sense of dread. Turning away caused the sense that he was suddenly much closer. Then he would vanish. These sightings clustered in the same counties where disappearances occurred a century earlier. No footprints were ever found. No photographs captured him. But one witness, a police officer, resigned after seeing what he described as the outline of a man, but no shadow, as if he absorbed the light instead of blocking it. His report was dismissed as exhaustion, but he refused to return to night patrol. Modern historians have attempted to explain the legend through psychology, rebellion, hallucination, and folklore. None of these theories fit the facts. The disappearances were too consistent. The victims too specifically chosen. The patterns too deliberate. Some scholars now propose a different interpretation, one suppressed because it challenges the foundation of American history. The theory suggests the stranger was not a person at all, but a phenomenon, a manifestation of collective suffering so great that it shaped itself into physical form. Not a ghost, not a demon, a consequence, a force created by centuries of violence, injustice, and violated humanity, condensing into something the land itself produced as retribution, a self-correcting mechanism, a living judgment, something older than America, older than slavery, older than the first sin committed on the soil, something that returned because the world had become too unbalanced for nature to tolerate. This is the theory historians refuse to publish, because it means history was never forgotten. History was watching. The disappearances ceased abruptly after the Civil War. Scholars argue this suggests the figure's purpose was tied specifically to the system of slavery. Once the chains fell, the force dissolved. But survivors offered a different explanation. He stopped because the land was satisfied. Others believed a more chilling possibility. He stopped because he knew injustice never really ends. He is only waiting for the next dawn that smells of chains. The most unsettling testimony came from a former slave who lived to 102 years old. When asked why the figure vanished, he replied, "You think he gone? No, he just sleeping inside the soil, waiting on who wakes him." The interviewer asked who that would be. The man answered, "The next man who thinks he can own another man." Historians dismissed this as metaphor. But the land remembers what people try to bury. Today, the South has paved its roads, built its suburbs, and layered new stories atop old bones. But certain patches of forest remain quiet. Certain fields remain barren. Certain families still lock their doors not from criminals, but from something older. A few researchers insist the no-shadow man still exists, dormant, patient, watchful. They argue he was never human, never alive, and therefore cannot die. And if injustice is a cycle, not a moment, then so is he. The stranger appeared when violence reached its peak. He disappeared when the chains were broken. But chains take many forms. And justice does not forget. Some legends are warnings. Some warnings are instructions. And some instructions are written not in ink, but in the way the wind dies suddenly when a barefoot figure stands at the edge of the trees. If you ever feel watched in an empty field, if the night grows quiet all at once, if your shadow stretches, but another figure casts none at all, you are not witnessing a ghost. You are witnessing history remembering itself. And that is the one thing humans can never bury.